All right, we have some fun experimenting to do. We are sitting in the home studio on the ZV-E10, and we're gonna try out a few lenses here just so you get an idea of what your extra dollar actually buys you. So right now, I am a arm's reach away from the camera. I can sit here and tap the lens. That's how far away I am. And the focal length, we're using the kit lens. So this is just what comes with the ZV-E10 in the base package. And this is what you can pull off. If you know a little bit about ISO, aperture, shutter speed, white balance, you know how to get some good lighting, this is what you can get out of the kit lens, the best possible aperture that it can manage, which is at the widest focal length of 16 millimeters. As you increase the focal length up to the 50 millimeter max, it has a variable aperture, so it's gonna go all the way up to 5.6 once you get all the way to 50 millimeters. But this is what a wide angle, or at least the widest angle possible on the kit lens can get you, 16 millimeters at, I think it's 3.5 aperture. We're at the base ISO of 500, 1/60 shutter speed, or I'm sorry, yeah, 1/60 shutter speed because we're shooting at 24 frames per second. This is how we look. So the next thing I want to do is show you a comparison of 16 millimeters, so same focal length, but just a swap of a lens. Camera stays exactly where it is, I stay exactly where I am, and we're gonna switch over to the Sigma 16 millimeter f1.4. So this is a significantly, let's just say it, better lens, higher priced lens with the aperture going all the way down to 1.4. It's much better for a low light environment such as this, and it is going to provide us vastly superior foreground and background separation. Also what you are probably chasing, the blur, the background blur, the bokeh as they call it behind us here. So if you look at those rows of encyclopedias and the other random things, knickknacks on the bookshelves, you'll be able to see those blur out much more aesthetically when we switch over to the Sigma. So let's go ahead and crack this bad boy open, get out the Sigma 16 here, and see what a nice f1.4 can do for us. All right, so I know what you're thinking. You just put on this expensive lens. Why do things look so much worse? Look how overexposed you are. Well, that is because I didn't touch the lighting. Remember, an f1.4 is letting in dramatically more light than an aperture of 3.5. So we don't need as much artificial or external lighting. And so let's turn that down just a bit. Another thing you'll catch is look how much brighter everything in the background is. So as we pull down, by the way, I think this is a 300 watt light. I had it at 67% earlier when we were on the kit lens. I've already dropped it down half to 30%, and this is how we're looking. And look how much better we are starting to look with the background, having a nice creamy blur to it. There's more color back there. It's not just all dark. You've regained a lot of the detail of the background, but at the same time, you can see it. You can see there's cool stuff going on back there, but it has a nice aesthetic bokeh to it. So this is dropped to less than half of the required light of our key light here, which, by the way, is, I believe it's the Neweer FSB 300 bicolor light. We have a softbox on there with a honeycomb grid to make the light wrap around us, nice and warm, but isolated and not flood the whole room with light. So this is the Sigma 16 millimeter. As I said, we didn't touch where the camera is. It's still exactly where it was before. I can reach out and tap the lens. I get asked pretty frequently, what lens focal length do I need if I want to do talking head, podcast, live streams? For an APS-C camera, you have to keep in mind that the focal length has to be multiplied by 50% or 1.5. And so this 16 millimeter is actually behaving like a 24 millimeter if you were on a full frame camera. And so it's all relative to, I try to use common sense analogies, like this is where the camera is. I'm not gonna say feet or whatever. I'm gonna say I can reach out and touch the camera. So, you know, my arm is probably what, 3 feet, something like that. And so the camera is 3 feet away from me. I can, if I were live streaming something like that, I could actually have the camera mounted within arm's reach of me and pull off a 16 millimeter focal length. And this is how wide of a view you'd be able to get in your frame, which honestly is pretty good. Like, a lot of people assume they need an ultra wide for a podcast kind of setup, and ultra wide being 10 millimeters, 11, 12, something like that on an APS-C. But as you can see, 16 millimeters is fine. It's not like the top of my head's being cut off. It's not up my nostrils. There's plenty of room all around me. You can see the setting that I'm filming in. So honestly, I think this is actually, well, there's a reason why the Sigma 16 millimeter f1.4 is the best selling APS-C lens ever to have been created. It's because of its versatility. You can do some good portrait photography with it. Ideally, you'd be 50 millimeters or higher for that, but you can do some pretty good portrait work with it. It's great for interviews, talking heads, live streams, etc. So this is the difference. We'll do a little bit of a side-by-side comparison, looking at 16 millimeters on the kit lens, which has you restricted to a 3.5 aperture. So you're not going to get the nice detail in the background, but also a smooth blur over it, versus what we have on the camera now. And obviously this is still on the ZV-E10. So let's go into our next lens test, and this is going to require us to reposition the camera. So we have next to us, we'll go ahead and go with the nifty 50. This is the Sony 50 millimeter f1.8. And it is called the nifty 50 because obviously 50 millimeters, but also nifty because this is one of the most affordable lenses out there. Oftentimes it's the first lens people get because of its affordability, and 50 millimeters being such a good focal length for portraits. Also important to remember, the more you increase your focal distance, the more separation you will see between background and foreground, especially more so if it's a faster lens, aka a lower aperture. So with this being a low aperture 1.8 and us increasing our focal length from 16 millimeters to 50 millimeters, we're going to be able to see, probably, I'm assuming, we'll see the footage, but even more of a background blur, even more separation pulling me into focus versus the background. But what it's going to require us to do, we're going to have some trade-offs here. We're going to have to take the camera and put it further away from us, for one. So if you were planning on doing a live stream setup where the camera is sitting on your desk, for example, if your desk and your monitor is right here and you're up against a wall, well, that's a problem because you can't push the camera and the lens further from you. Assuming you want to have a frontal shot of yourself for your live stream, you're going to have to go with something like this 16 millimeter or lower. Now, if you're in an environment like I am, where there's actually a good bit of space both in the front of my desk and in the back, then you have more flexibility with the different types of lenses you can use and focal length. So in my case, we're going to have to push out this camera tripod setup probably a solid 8 to 10 feet in order for us to use this 50 millimeter. But after that trade-off, we're going to be able to gain much better background separation, and well, you'll just see the results here in a second. So what we'll do, if you'll recall, the kit lens here, the little pancake lens, it also does 50 millimeters, but it does 50 millimeters at 5.6 aperture. And so you are going to quickly learn the difference between 5.6 versus 1.8 on the old nifty 50. All right, we're back to the kit lens, and the reason we look worse is because, remember, I brought the light down because the other Sigma 16mm f1.4 has such better aperture. It can bring more light in, so you don't have to rely on so much external lighting. Well, so that's where we're at now. I just wanted to show you, before we kick up to 50 millimeters, what 50 millimeters would look like when the camera is still at arm's distance here. You ready for this? This is why you can't use a 50 millimeter when it's sitting on your desk right in front of you, because 50 millimeters looks like that. Not very useful to us now, is it? This is why we're going to have to take the camera and the tripod and push this thing out another 8 to 10 feet probably across the room. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we're going to have to look at adjusting our light to compensate for the fact that we have a 5.6 aperture. Okay, and we're back. But can you even tell? Look how dark it is in here. It's practically pitch black. This is what happens when you're filming in a low light environment and your aperture is 5.6. It's literally unusable footage. There's no amount of post-production. If you tried to go into post and boost your exposure on this, you're going to get so much noise. It's going to look like it was filmed on a Motorola Razr, okay? So this is not what we want. So how do we fix this situation? Well, we can increase the light. We can increase the shutter speed, or sorry, we can decrease the shutter speed. So let's do a couple of things. Let's go ahead and go back to our external light. Remember, we're on 28% out of 100 with this 300 watt light here. When we were using the Sigma, we're gonna come and see if we can fix this situation as best as possible with our external lighting here. How does that look? I got a monitor right here that I'm keeping an eye on things. By the way, the Sony Imaging Edge app is the app you need if you're using a ZV-E10. If you're using one of the later, more recent cameras, you'd want to use the Sony Monitor and Control app. So I would say, honestly, this looks pretty good. I mean, to most people, they're going to say that's actually a pretty polished looking production. Now, the side of my face that is not lit, as you can see, is like just black, which is a pretty hard shadow. Not a big fan of that. So we had to crank the light up to 77% to make this look pretty usable. And now, of course, if I had a second key light over here or a second fill light, then I could try to balance out that side of the face a bit more. But what you're gonna see is, without even having to bring in another light, as soon as we switch to the 50mm 1.8 aperture, because it lets in so much more light, even the side of my face that doesn't have artificial lighting on it, you'll be able to see detail in it. Another thing you're going to be able to see as soon as we switch over to the 1.8 here is take a look at our background. That aperture of 5.6 has basically lost all of our beautiful bokeh in the background. I mean, things look okay, they look decently aesthetic there, but there is not much separation from me being nice and sharp versus the sharpness of the background. And so let's try to fix that by upgrading our gear. And this is a cheap upgrade. This is a $200 lens, which is, relatively speaking, in the world of lenses, a cheap upgrade. So without further ado, let me walk across the room. By the way, just showing you how much I love you guys. Not that I only want you to learn about the gear and the lighting and the settings and all that, but I also broke my tape measure because I was curious. Just how far did we have to move the tripod and the camera out in order to use this 50mm? Well, here's my, you can't see it. Here's my tape measure here. And here is the tape that usually goes inside of it. And the tape literally got pulled out. It broke. It's a little cheap thing, but the measurement that I was seeking, I was able to secure, and that measurement was nearly 11 feet. So remember when we had the 16mm on, it was right here in arm's distance. It was basically 3 feet away. In order to use a 50mm, I had to put the camera all the way more than 10 feet out. And you'll notice, in terms of framing this shot, look how much of the background we lost. You go and build this beautiful studio with these nice accent lights and all the stuff on the bookshelves and all that. All right, well, you might like this smaller, tighter frame. That's just a cosmetic choice. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But as you can see, even when we are more than 10 feet out, look how much more zoomed in or cropped in I am as compared to that 16mm. That's because 16 is significantly wider than 50. All right, without further ado, let's throw on the nifty 50 and you're gonna see a couple of things. And hopefully you will see a much more aesthetic background and you'll see more of me, because this side of my face will actually be receiving more light than it is currently with this ridiculous f5.6 aperture. Now, would you look at that? Is this a recurring theme yet? We put on a nicer lens, but our picture looks terrible. We didn't touch the camera, we didn't move the camera. Why does our picture look so much worse? For the time being, it's because we have too much light. I am dramatically overexposed. And so how do we fix this problem? We reduce the amount of light coming in artificially. So we'll go ahead and bring that down. You could also reduce the ISO on the phone. You could increase the shutter speed. Those have trade-offs for a separate conversation. We're talking gear here. But let's bring this brightness down. Oh, and also you'll notice, let me dial it in to where I like it. Something about right there, I would say. And so you'll probably notice, look how much more vibrant and colorful and detailed but smoothly blurred the background is as compared to where we were with the f5.6 50mm kit lens. And if I were able to be closer to the camera, you would have even more bokeh in the background. But with the restrictions of this being a 50mm lens, if I were to move the camera any closer to me, you're gonna lose most of the frame in the background. It's just gonna be me and my pretty mug taking up the whole shot. So these are the trade-offs that you're making when you talk about using a certain focal distance for a certain recording environment. A 50mm, as I said, if you're gonna use it for live streaming, a podcast, something like that, it's gonna have to be pretty damn far away from you. And in fact, the way my room here is set up, I can't even get this thing any further from me. I can't get more of the background into the shot. I physically can't if I'm using a 50mm lens, which is the point of these wider angle lenses like the 16mm. So hopefully all of this is starting to make sense to you, the trade-offs of aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. I know we didn't get into great detail on some of those other settings with shutter speed and playing with the ISO very much. You have to start introducing subjects like base ISO settings for different cameras and trying to always stay in the base ISO if possible. The way you make that possible is by not relying on boosting your exposure in camera, but by boosting your exposure with external lighting. So, I mean, I suppose a good example of that, let's just try it. In case you're curious, we can do it real quick. Let's go ahead and try to say we didn't even have this light, but we're on the 50mm. How could we try to get ourselves back visible again? So, all right, we just killed our key light, and we're gonna try to make ourselves at least somewhat visible again. Look, I look terrible. This is what happens when you have lighting on the background in order to actually show the background, but your subject is not lit. So maybe I could try to do something like boost my ISO up. So I was at the base ISO of 500. Let's crank it up, see how much we would have to boost it in order to get some detail and visibility back on me again. And you're gonna see what happens to the quality of the footage. We're already over 2000 ISO. Oh, it's looking terrible. Look, so the problem is the ISO isn't specific to anything in the frame. It increases the exposure of the entire frame. Technically not literally the exposure, it's amplifying the signal coming into the sensor, but that's yet again deep into the weeds. But I mean, look how awful this looks. This is why you have to know your lighting, your physical gear, your actual hardware, and how much of a difference that makes. You can't just put a camera in a room, dim the lights, and start filming. You actually need to know how the ambient lighting in the room works. There are some lights around, but particularly the key light and fill lights and these kind of things, that's where they really start to bring out the drama and the engagement of the subject versus the background. So this looks terrible. I hate it. The back is way overexposed because we had to crank the ISO up. I look very, very blah. There's not really any nice shadowing going on or anything like that. Let's try to fix this situation by decreasing our shutter speed. That's another way to get more light into your camera. But the problem is you start running into issues with your frame rate, and you can't adjust your frame rate mid-recording. So if I brought my shutter speed down to 1/40 and then tried to bring down the ISO to a more reasonable level so there's not so much noise and overexposure being contributed by the ISO, still not anything remotely as good. This is 1/40 shutter speed with 1250 ISO. It's just not, I'm being honest, it's just not good. I hope your recordings don't look like this. So to bring us back to something that is actually pleasing to the eye, I'll bring our key light back to about 30% here. And now look, I'm super exposed. Me, the subject, is super exposed, but that's because of the adjustments we made to shutter speed and ISO. So let's bring those back down to where they should be. The base ISO of 500. Starting to look better, starting to look a bit more professional. Let's bring our shutter speed back to 1/60, which is where you should be. Shutter speed should always be basically twice of your recording frame rate. So We're recording in 24 frames per second right now, whether it's 24 or 30. That's what everything is filmed on when you're watching TV or Netflix, movies, Hollywood movies, etc. Assuming you're not talking about a slow motion scene, your average talking narrative content is filmed at 24 or 30 frames per second. All right, you guys, I think that's going to wrap it up. Are there any other lenses I wanted to test? I do have this Tamron 35mm f2.8, which is basically splitting the difference between where we were, a 16 and a 50. We were at 5.6 aperture all the way down to 1.4. This would kind of be the happy medium in between trying to get more into the frame because we're no longer on 50 millimeters. And at the same time, we'd be able to have more light into the lens because we're not at 5.6 aperture as we were with the kit lens, but we're not going to have quite as much light coming in through the lens as we would with the Sigma 1.4. I know it's a lot of different numbers, it's a lot of different settings, and you're not sure which one you should prioritize changing before the other, but some general rules of thumb are look up the base ISO of your camera. A lot of cameras have a dual base ISO. The ZV-E10, for example, the lower base ISO is 500. I think the high ISO is 1250 or something like that. On my FX30, it's 800 and 2500. So the lower base ISO is what the manufacturer of the camera would suggest that you should try to film in whenever you are in a highlight. I just got a pop-up from the camera saying, camera temperature has risen. Stop shooting if you're in shoot mode. So we're going to have to cut today's lesson short. Base ISO is going to be a conversation for another day. I went ahead and put on the Tamron 28 f2.8, I think it is. And I had to move the camera up about 4 feet in order to frame things pretty well. And I actually really like this frame. I think I like this better than the 16 millimeters. The 16 millimeters was a little too wide for my preference. It was getting too much of the room. This is really boxing in the bookcases, frames me nicely. But one thing I did not do is adjust anything in compensating for that aperture of only 2.8. Remember, we were on the 50 millimeter 1.8, and so we lost to, what is it? I get confused on the math of stops all the time, but the difference between a 2.8 aperture versus a 1.8 are pretty significant. So that is why I am so dimly lit. Let's try to recover some of the detail on myself and the pulling my focus into being, me being the subject of the frame. Let's bring our light up a little bit here. Maybe about 50%. I think that's pretty good. I think this looks good. So guys, this is a very, very budget setup. This is the ZV-E10 with the Tamron. That's a $175 lens. It's actually cheaper than the Sony 50 millimeters. So this is where it really does come down to experimentation in terms of figuring out what level of impact aperture has on the exposure of the frame. Also, what focal distance is going to be required in order for you to frame the shot the way you want it. And this is one reason why we should not poo-poo. I left it across the room so I can't show it to you. But the kit lens that comes with the ZV-E10, and most cameras come with the kit lens, people kind of think they can just throw it away as soon as they start upgrading their glass. But you shouldn't do that because it allows you to dial in the focal distance just to see what it looks like to frame the shot. You can see, okay, maybe I don't like the light here because the aperture on the kit lens is crap, starting at 3.5 all the way up to 5.6 when you're out to 50 millimeters. But you can at least see if the camera is in this spot, this many feet away from me, this is what 16 millimeters looks like versus 28 millimeters versus 50 millimeters or anywhere in between. And that can help you decide and narrow down your decision about what focal length lens you should go and buy that has a much better aperture, that will allow better background separation. It'll allow more light into the frame so you don't necessarily have to go rely on external lighting. You can record in low light environments and so on and so forth. So anyways, guys, I think that's a good spot to wrap it up. The camera was giving me overheating warnings, so I think that's a good time to call it. Hope you enjoyed these comparisons. You learned something. If you did, hit like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment. Tell me what you learned. Ask any questions that you have. Until next time, you guys, take care of yourselves. America first, and Christ is King.